I'm going to talk, I have talked a lot about planting green. You've heard a lot about it. I have 3 years of data that I'm summarizing, but the new piece about this is we've done an economic analysis on 2 of the farms on planting green, and I thought you folks would be interested in that. So I'm going to get to that right away. Just for people who might not be familiar, I'm just going to get through this here. The demonstration farm network, the concept here is to learn from local farmers. So one of them, Jay, is here. I don't think anybody else is, and of course Don and Chad. Sorry if I missed somebody else. We have several farms that are already doing these things, and so we picked them to learn some lessons. And so we have been looking at economic benefits from their real life experiences. So these are real farms that we're doing these trials on, like David mentioned, 3-acre plots, larger plot sizes on real farms. Learning about, so we take some hard data, some quantification, but then some quality data as well, just about their observed changes, and we also document those. So basically these farms have been doing these things a while. They sort of know what they're doing. I think they would all say they're still learning, but we want to lift them up, and hopefully other farmers will be able to copy what they're doing. So planting green, again, planting cash crops into growing living cover crops. So the difference is basically delaying the termination of the cover crop and killing it either right before planting, like is happening here. So this roller trimper is going ahead of the planter, or right afterwards. And so you're just delaying that termination, you're getting extra growth. And so it's extending the benefits of cover crops. So all the great things we've been hearing about cover crops today and for the last decade or so, just that gets extended because of the extra 7 to 14 days of growth. And so you get extra biomass accumulation that goes back onto the soil. And some advantages why you would want to do it is you can get out earlier in the spring. You can plant earlier, you can get manure out there sooner. And that's where David, was like, well, we got to test this out because we're being able to get out there sooner. Let's see if there's anything to this. Sometimes it can also help with late emergent weeds because you have that mulch. So the mulch can help conserve water. So if it's a drier summer, that can help out, but it can also keep weeds at bay. It's not a silver bullet because you gotta sometimes modify your equipment or buy new equipment. Of course, the management, you have to really be paying attention. If you don't get on top of it, it can get out of control, and then you're gonna have more work to do. There's this idea that the soils are cooler, or there's a delayed emergence of the cash crop, or it's an uneven stand development. And so it could be tricky, but nothing's easy. So basically what we're looking at here is to get into the experimental design. So like I said, right now we're actually up to 19 farms in the network. We started with 2 in 2018. So we've been getting funding because of the success of this network. 5 farms had this experimental design that I'm about to share with you, which it's basically 6 treatments. And then we're looking at 9 different ecosystem services and at least 3 years. So like Don's farm and the Pan Cow farm that you're going to hear from, that was 3 years, and we're pretty much done with that. But some of the farms have other funding sources, so we're going with it a little bit longer, a few more years at least. So I think a lot of you have seen this before, but just for those who haven't, so basically we have 6 treatments, but the main treatment here is just the cover crop itself, that the planting rate. So it's basically a 0 rate, no cover crop. And then we had the farmer rate, which was basically, I think David and the farmer figured out, okay, this is what we think is the best for planting green, because you do want to kind of keep the cover a little thinner. And then we just simply they turned the planter around and just doubled that. So that's the main treatment. And then what we did to facilitate this on farm trial here is then they would go through and burn down at pre-plant termination, or which is late April, which is like when you would typically kill the cover crop. So they'd go through here. And so at that time, David or the farmer would say, hey, we're about to spray So we would go out and we would sample here, and then we would sample here. And then after the burn down area, I'm sorry, then a couple weeks later, whatever, 10 days, then when it was time to actually plant the cash crop, then we would just sample from here. Because this was all senesced and there was nothing growing, so there was nothing to sample. And it was kind of this area here that they would make the pass. So first we would sample here and over here, and then they would, you can see this line kind of where these plots are. This is actually in the fall, not in the spring, but so here's the 2X. You can see it's a little thicker than the 1X. It might be hard to see on this on the screen here. And then that's the 0 in the back. So, and then like I said, that part would get a pass and burn down. So you'll see this in the graphs coming up. That's why it takes some time to show you what it looks like. So we're expecting that the late termination of the termination timing of the cover crop, which is planting green, will provide greater multifunctionality than the earlier termination, free plant, or the no cover control. And I called it fallow because not in this case, I think both farmers in this case sprayed, but to keep the soil bare, but some farmers didn't, or there were volunteers from the previous season that grew in. And so some of the plots, not in this case, but had cover, or had there, you'll see there was some cover actually growing. So it's just because there was volunteers there from the previous season. So we expected the 1X rate would basically be the best for everything, and the 2X would be best for the environmental, but probably would cost more. So the first farm is Don Branton, who farms with his son Chad, and they're here today. I'm sure everyone here knows them. 1,500 acre farm with corn for grain. They have sweet corn, rye, processed vegetables, and just the whole suite of conservation practices that we're all familiar with. But he's doing it, and he's been doing it for a long time. And then we have the Pan Cow Farm, which is a dairy and castile. So just a little bit south of here, and we worked mostly with JD, but he's farming with his parents, David and Valerie. They have corn mostly for silage, alfalfa, forage cocktail mix. 850 cows on 1,350 acres, and they're doing some nutrient management, strip till, and cover crops, and then they're trying this planting green as well. So. Getting into the results. So this is a visual on Don's farm. So this was actually at planting. So a couple weeks after it was terminated. So you can see it's pretty bare here. This had a cover crop, but was terminated. So it kind of looks like this, but there's some residue there. And then that's what was planted into there was that. And then that was terminated. On the Pan Cow farm, this was actually at the pre-plant termination stage, but it looks somewhat similar to Don's. This was like, a couple weeks earlier. But, so we're sampling out of here, so it's a little sparse there, but anyway, that's kind of what it looks like. And then here are the cover crop species and rate. So Don does use a lot of, he uses mixes here, so there's just a lot in here. And you can get this information from me later if you want. So he does the biostrips. So here's where the cash crop is going to be planted, gets this, and then this mostly winter kills, I believe, and then they come back through on the wheel row, and then that gets terminated. Pan Cow did rye only, and then in 2021 he had the 50 pounds and then 60 pounds in 2022, and that's important because of the economics, you'll see. So looking at soil moisture, okay, so what this is 3 seasons of data. So for Don's farm, I took the 3 years. So it is different for Don's farm. He had different fields each year, but the similar soil type. And then all going in, or corn being planted into it. Anyway, I combined all those 3 years, and then for Pan Cow, same deal. He had the same 2 fields for 1 year, then a different field the last year. But anyway, but it's 3 years of combined data. So you're going to see some variability because for one, just year to year, there's variability. But that's my point is there is going to be variability, and probably the answer for all of this is gonna be, it depends, you know, should you do it or not? It depends, and that's probably still my answer even after all this time and effort, but here's some numbers behind it. So in terms of soil moisture, we are actually seeing the soil drying out. So this is kind of the control is this bar here. So this was the fallow, no cover, just was sprayed a couple weeks before planting. And you can see the soil definitely dries out a few weeks later, right? So, and then on Don's farm, you know, it's a little bit, I mean, this is like, we're just talking about percent here, right? So this is like a percentage wetter, but is that a difference, significant difference in terms of the plant? Probably not, but yeah, so but you can see here for the 1X and the 2X, they're drier than their counterpart and drier than the control. So it does dry out the soil a little bit. The temperatures though, I don't want to take everyone's time. Really, I mean, we're talking about a degree or so difference. I don't think it really makes a difference, but that's also important to know because I had said earlier, the belief is kind of it cools the soils, and it doesn't seem to really be that impactful in terms of the temperature. Getting into the biomass. So again, here's what I'm talking about. There is a lot of variability. That's more of the season to season variability, but looking at the averages here, again, keep in mind that's the control. So quite a bit more biomass that you would expect, you know, over double or triple here the biomass. And again, you would expect there to be biomass. We're growing a cover crop. But importantly, this transfers into the available nitrogen from the cover crop. So what this is here is the above ground biomass only. So not looking at whatever was fixed into the soil from the cover crops itself. This is just the biomass that's going onto the surface. And then using an equation from Clearine-Ketterings, about half of this nitrogen is available to that year's cash crop. So, you know, this control, you're basically getting almost nothing. And from here, you're getting about 54 pounds of nitrogen from that biomass in the 2X. So so half of that, you know, a little over 25, 26 pounds of nitrogen is coming just from the biomass. That would be available that first year, then year 2, year 3, you get half and then half again. So over time, you could build up some nitrogen in your soil that way. But importantly, you know, doubling the cover crop biomass itself did not translate necessarily into doubling your nitrogen. So maybe the 1X then would be better in terms of all around benefit. This is the carbon and nitrogen ratio of the biomass again. So, you know, I'm not really qualified to talk too much about this other than you do want to pay attention to that. You don't want to get too much carbon in there and tying up the nitrogen. So it's just something to keep in mind. So yeah, I don't know really what a good ratio is or a bad ratio to say for sure, but just something to keep in mind. But it does look like the planting green, you know, does have a little bit more carbon in there to think about. So getting down to the bottom line here, which is the yields. Again, this is all 3 years combined. And so we have, you can see here that the 1X, basically the takeaway here is that the cover crop, the kind of the conventional pre-plant termination appears actually to do very, very well in terms of yield and consistently, because this is combined of 3 years of data. You know, we also see though that the planting green can also do well. You know, I would say probably a farmer would be concerned with this compared to this. But we also have this. Well, this is the cover crop, but we also have this compared to this. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I wonder if this battery is going dead. My voice is going dead. So again, here, you know, this regular cover cropping pre-plant termination did well, but but these are also pretty comparable to the yield there, to the control. I mean, David.
one thing about Don to keep in mind, that's after rye, and so that control fallow is actually a lot of rye into it. It's not just, it's a lot of volunteer rye from the previous crop coming into play. Not a cover crop applied, but you did have a cover crop from the previous crop.
Yeah, with the fallow is why
Yeah,
there's,
so it's almost like a cover crop, but it's not the biotill.
right, it was the rye, okay.
Yeah.
So looking at the economics, so we're gonna, this is, sorry to bring this part at the very end of a long day of PowerPoints, because I'm gonna read each one of these numbers to you, and I'm not gonna do that. Keep in mind these colors here as I talk about our economic analysis, because what we used was, and I couldn't have done it without, I actually had 3 ag economists help me. So John Hanchar at Cornell Cooperative Extension, and then a retired NRCS ag economist. She actually used to be an extension a long time ago. June Gravemeyer was out here in Western New York decades ago. She helped, and then also Ben from American Farmland Trust. So they all took a look at this marginal analysis. So my tables that I'm going to show you don't look exactly like this, but the concept is the same. So we're only looking at the changes that happen between treatments. So assuming that most of the things that you do in a field are similar or the same, we're only looking at the differences and then doing the economics on that. So how that works here is that you have kind of this becomes kind of like a scale. So you take some stuff away, so you decrease your costs. Whoops. And so when you decrease your costs, that kind of weighs the scale to a net income increase. But then you'll have some things like cover crop costs, costs of setting up the planter, that sort of thing. That's gonna decrease your income. And so that'll tend to weigh the scale back that way. As a farmer, you want it to go this way, right? So it's just looking at what goes away. So we added things or took things away, and that weighs the scale towards profit or to a loss of profit. So looking at Pancow and Branton. So one reason why I chose these 2 farms today, one, because Don's here, so he can chime in if you'd like. Also, we have 2 case studies on this. One of them was a handout today. The other one will be a handout soon. I just didn't get it done in time. And that's Don's. So you can look at these in more detail. They'll be online on the Genesee River Demonstration Farm Network webpage. So these things were the same between both analyses. So the changes in the value of production, the cost, and the resulting profit were calculated using values of crops produced and selected expenses. So basically the yield was a big part of that. And then increases or decreases in the value of production for each year were determined by multiplying the difference in yield by the price of corn grain or corn silage. So basically it's what you're going to see in the tables is you won't see the control, you'll just see the result of the 1x or the 2x subtracted from what the control was. And there was something else I was going to say about that, but I don't remember. Oh, I showed you 3 years of data before combined. This is actually only 2 years. You'll see that it's 2 years, 21 and 22. We did not yet get to 2023. I actually just did these analysis yesterday or the day before, so it's very fresh here. I didn't get to everything. So a little bit of the differences in the Branton and Pancow is most of the input costs were unchanged among the plots at Don's. And then there was a difference in the cost of herbicide materials used on the control and treatment plots for Pancow. And all his plots had 1 field pass for herbicide application. So it was weed management in the controls, and the treatment plots that had the cover crop, he actually didn't need to spray for weeds, but he needed to spray to terminate the cover crop. So he still basically had 1 pass in each case. So here's the table. So remember, I had them side by side before, red and green. Now it's up, one stacked on top of the other. And again, there's a lot of numbers here. So I'm not going to go through them all. This is Don's here. So we had 2021 and 2022. And again, you'll see a lot of the numbers here are similar. But the bottom line here is, oh, I'm sorry, when you're looking at this table, I told you I was gonna have a lot of animations. So keep in mind, this was the 1X side here, right? And then we have the pre-plant termination versus the planting green. And then we have the 2X, which is the pre-plant and the planting green. So there's a lot happening here. It's the end of a long day, but just try to keep that in mind. These two tables are the same, just two different years. The 1X and 2X, then the pre-plant and the planting green. So those go up there. And what we saw here basically was what was the cost increases, really no surprise, right? They had to buy the cover crop seed and plant it. So, and they didn't in the control. So you're gonna expect there to be a cost. And I'm sorry, you really can't see these numbers very well, but basically so that's where the cost increases were largely from in both cases, in both years. But what we have down here is the 2X pre-plant termination basically had the biggest loss in 2021, and in 2022 also the biggest loss. So this is $94 an acre, that's $74 an acre, and that's compared to the control, right? So that was, you don't want to see that if I'm trying to promote this. But then, and then the least loss in this case was the 1X planting green. Had the least loss compared to the control, but it still was less than the control by almost $16 an acre. And then on here, there was actually an increase compared to the control, right? So this one actually made more money than the control. So 2X planting green, and that was due to the yield increase largely. So kind of a mixed bag. I can't really give you like a definitive answer, but it is possible to have a profit here with especially just cover cropping in general, right? So now the pan cow farm, similar story, the cover crop seed and cover crop planting. And this table, I'm not going to show you the fancy animation, even though it might help you to stay awake. But just keep in mind 1X, 2X here. So we have, again, a similar story, whether the cost increases were due to the planting of the cover crop. And then down here is the 2X pre-plant termination had the largest gain here, $43. And also here, the 2X planting grain, actually $100 compared to the control. And then the planting green 2X here though, okay, I'm sorry. So both of these were pre-plant that had a profit compared to the control. Then the planting green actually had the largest loss here compared to the control. The 1X had it here, planting green. So, it's farm by farm, it's year by year. I can't give you like super definitive answers, but here's the takeaways that I got. So the 1X pre-plant, which is kind of your standard cover crop practice, had consistently highest yields. And then the pre-plant showed profit compared to the control. The 1X pre-plant showed profit compared to control on one farm in 2022, but loss in 2021 on both farms and one farm in 2022. So it's kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge there. So I wish it was like a little simpler, but it's not. And then the 2X pre-plant also did well with yield compared to control. And then 2X generally showed profit compared to control on both farms in 2022. And it did so for one farm with the pre-plant and one for the planting green in 2021. I didn't put that part there, I don't think. So, my biggest takeaway by looking at these two farms only, and keep in mind I have other farms to look at this with, but I think overall planting a cover crop is not as costly as I think we're led to believe. I have other case studies showing just adopting soil health practices in general. You aren't going to show a profit. Jay has a case study on that. So that's kind of the secret lesson that I learned. Maybe planting green, it's a hit or miss, right? But I think just planting a cover crop, you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get a decent bang for your buck. in terms of yield and also in terms of soil health benefits. But planting green does give you some things that you might like, which is drying out the soil moisture in the spring, so you might be able to get out there a little bit earlier. The 2X can double the available nitrogen for cash crop compared to pre-plant termination. The soil temperature does not seem to be affected. You are getting that extra mulch out there to help with the weeds. We did hear anecdotally, not with these two farms necessarily, but some of the other farms are able to not have to spray for late emergent weeds. So you can get weed control, you can get some cost savings with nitrogen, and then you might be able to eliminate a pass with so minimizing your glyphosate. And that's it. Thanks. So any questions? Yeah.
I got another.
Oh, he's got an announcement, so we'll hold off on that.
One comment, it looked like the carbon nitrogen was probably explaining why in the paint cow case, when you let it go further, you've got a higher carbon nitrogen ratio, would be a bad
Yeah.
thing, but in Don Brand's case, getting more biomass was a good thing, so there was some differences, I think. It looked like based on the species, one carbon nitrogen ratio went up, where Don's it didn't seem to change the carbon nitrogen.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, thanks.
The other final comment I could think of is all 3 seasons were very relatively dry in the spring. We didn't have a wet year, and I don't want to wish anybody a wet spring this top on farms, but if we had a wet spring, I bet those numbers would change dramatically. Because I know that intuitively, you let that cover crop throughout the soil, so you get a better seed bed to plant into. So I mean, it's something to keep back in your mind. I think there's years you get cover crop to grow when you're having a very wet spring. And that'll help drive the soil faster for you, so you can get in there and plant it sooner. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. And so you can decide, right? Like you can plant the cover crop and then you can let it grow and then you can be like, oh, it's wet. We gotta get out there and kill it. But you can at least plant the cover crop. You don't have to plant green. You can always just kill it earlier. Was there anything online? Nope. Okay, so any other last minute questions? Nope. So we have an announcement from Dennis. Thanks again, everyone.